Hey guys, tonight we slip into the quiet twilight of imperial houses, where floors once polished by armies of servants now creak under your careful steps. You can almost taste the dust in the air, fine, ancient, and heavy with the decisions of people who thought their power would last forever. Their palaces look serene in the moonlight, but every soft echo hints at panic. And just so you know, you probably won't survive this if you're expecting a gentle stroll through history's most peaceful endings. Dynasties don't bow out quietly. They unravel, like the frayed hem of an old robe catching on everything in its path. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through a corridor that shouldn't exist, an imaginary hall connecting the last days of dynasties from across continents and centuries, each one flickering like a candle in its final hour. A chill brushes your arm, the kind that happens when you realize the people in charge weren't always the steady, majestic figures textbooks try to carve them into. They were stressed, exhausted, and sometimes hilariously unprepared. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen the Egyptians used? That should have been a hint that ruling elites weren't always making the brightest decisions. Your first stop is the late Romanov court of Russia, a mainstream fact right off the bat. Their final years were a swirl of political chaos, war pressures, and ballooning public resentment. You move through their winter palace and notice how every gilded door feels like a barricade trying to keep modernity out. And in some corners, servants whisper about Rasputin, a man whose presence is still one of history's favorite controversies. Historians still argue whether he was a psychic healer, a savvy manipulator, or just exceptionally good at convincing people he knew secrets about the universe. Whatever he was, the dynasty led him too close, always a bad sign. But dynasties rarely fall because of one eccentric figure. You glide past tapestries showing generations of rulers, each convinced the family line was unbreakable. Yet you feel an undercurrent running through them, a quiet arrogance, the kind that makes rulers ignore warnings until it's too late. You've seen that same vibe in modern group projects. Someone insists everything fine as the whole thing catches fire. Farther down the corridor, the Ming dynasty waits. You step into Beijing's Forbidden City, where the last emperors spent more time buried in rituals than addressing their empire's enormous problems. A quirky tidbit here. One late Ming emperor was so bored with ruling that he spent his time making pottery instead. Imagine a world-shaping throne wobbling because its occupant preferred ceramics. And yet, it's these oddly human moments that make dynasties feel real. The decline wasn't always dramatic. It was often slow, bureaucratic, and strangely mundane. Your footsteps carry you into the flickering shadows of the Abbasid Caliphate's twilight. Once known for a vast golden age, it eventually shrank to a symbolic husk within the walls of Baghdad. Courtiers say the caliph spent more time hosting poetry contests than governing. Historians still argue whether this cultural flowering hastened the collapse or merely embellished it. You lean against a carved pillar, listening to a poet recite something flowery about the moon, while a governor nervously checks reports of approaching enemies. Poetry is beautiful, but it's terrible at defending borders. Dynasties don't crumble because of one big failure. They crumble because small cracks go unfixed for too long. You trail your hand along a wall where the plaster peels in the shape of a family crest. Every flake that falls feels like a person ignored, a crisis shrugged off, a warning dismissed. Some rulers were competent but unlucky. Others were lucky but incompetent. The worst combination, of course, is incompetent and unlucky. History has roasted such figures for centuries. You hear laughter behind another door. It's not joyful, it's the nervous, brittle laughter of courtiers pretending things aren't falling apart. You slip inside a room that resembles the final banquets of the French Bourbons before their dynasties collapse. Crystal clinks, candles tremble. The king frowns at reports of angry crowds, but everyone around him insists it'll blow over. Spoiler: it did not blow over. If anything, it blew up. Historians still argue whether the final missteps were inevitable or merely the result of a ruler who desperately needed better advisors, and maybe a modern economics course. You move on, and the corridor shifts subtly beneath your feet. Somewhere behind you, a throne sits empty. Somewhere ahead, another one is wobbling. The scent of burning incense mixes with the faint smell of mildew, as though these dynasties have been preserved in a jar somewhere, waiting for someone like you to observe the moment just before the fall. What went wrong? Everything went wrong, but never all at once. The beauty of this corridor of endings is realizing that decline sneaks up slowly. A bad harvest here, a poorly chosen heir there, a new technology that undermines old ways, a rebellious governor who decides today is the day he wants to be king. And through it all, rulers keep pretending the world will politely pause long enough for them to catch up. You step over a loose stone, noticing how the corridor twists again, this time into the dying embers of the Ottoman Empire's long decline. A mainstream fact here: it lasted over 600 years, one of the longest dynasties in history, yet by its final century it was called the sick man of Europe. You wander past an empty divan where advisors once debated reforms that always arrived too late. A quirky detail. One sultan was so obsessed with clocks that he collected hundreds, trying to impose order on a world slipping out of his grasp. Time, apparently, didn't listen. You drift onward and the corridor dims. You've seen the proud, the unlucky, the unprepared, the overstretched. And now, finally, you sense the universal truth humming through these fatting halls. Dynasties fall because they forget to adapt. They trust their old stories more than the changing world outside their palace walls. And by the time they realize the world has moved on, the corridor is already closing behind them. You exhale, steadying yourself. There are many more rooms ahead, 15 nights of collapse if you're counting, but this first glimpse sets the tone. Power is fragile. Crowns are heavy. Thrones rarely have good lumbar support. And dynasties, no matter how glorious, always leave echoes rather than endings. You keep walking. You continue along the corridor, and the air shifts. Thicker now, warmer, like the breath of people arguing behind closed doors. You recognize the feeling instantly. It's the weight of families coming apart from the inside, the slow-motion chaos of fraying thrones and messy rivalries. You step forward, and the hallway blooms into a dozen overlapping palace chambers, each one lit by candlelight that flickers a little too violently, like it's reacting to the tension in the room. A royal family is supposed to be the symbol of unity, but you already sense that most dynasties fall long before the first angry mob arrives at the gate. They crack from within. It's like those moments when you open a bag of chips and it explodes, not because of outside pressure, but because someone sealed it badly in the first place. You brush your fingertips along a carved wooden balustrade as you enter the heart of the late Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. The room smells faintly of incense and bitter politics. Cleopatra may dominate the pop culture version of this story, but the dynasty was already a tangle of family infighting long before she came along. A mainstream fact here: more than a dozen Ptolemaic rulers were murdered by relatives, siblings taking out siblings, mothers turning on sons, and at least one uncle who probably should have never been invited to family dinners. You step around a statue and watch a brother and sister glare at each other with the kind of toxic energy usually reserved for group chats after someone leaves the emojis on read. Historians still argue whether this tradition of in-house assassinations was strategic or simply pathological. You can't help thinking Cleopatra's dramatic alliances with Rome might have been less epic romance, and more "please get my family to stop trying to stab me." You shift again, and suddenly you're walking into the Mughal Empire's fatting years. The Mughal palaces still shimmer in cool marble, but the closer you get, the more you sense exhaustion. Everyone is tired here. Everyone is suspicious. You pause near a carved Jarraka window where Emperor Shah Alam II stares out into nothing, his once mighty realm shrinking by the day. Then there's the earlier era, the one with Aurangzeb's sons tearing each other apart for the throne. A quirky tidbit: one prince, Muhammad Azam, once tried to bribe soldiers with mangoes to win their support. Mangoes. Imagine risking your life for a fruit basket. Yet the gesture only shows how desperate imperial siblings became when the line of succession wasn't clear. Historians still argue whether Aurangzeb created this mess through misguided piety, sheer stubbornness, or because he trusted the wrong sons. As you move on, the air fills with something sharper, perfume mixed with paranoia. You've stepped into the later Bourbon dynasty of France again, but this time behind the scenes. Court women whisper behind fans, noblemen glare over wine glasses, and everyone seems to be plotting something mildly ridiculous. The monarchy's internal fractures weren't always dramatic. Sometimes they were petty. One duchess feuds with another because of a dress. A prince refuses to speak to his cousin because of a hunting field insult from 5 years earlier. But even pettiness adds weight. A dynasty is like a ship. You ignore too many tiny leaks, and suddenly the whole thing is sinking. A door to your right bursts open, figuratively, not literally, and ushers you into the late Habsburg Empire. You step into a long hallway of portraits, each ruler staring down with that particular Habsburg jawline and an expression that says, "I have 47 cousins and I'm related to all of them twice." Marriages here were political tools, but the gene pool became, well, let's just call it shallow enough to wade through without getting your ankles wet. A mainstream historical fact: inbreeding contributed to medical problems among later Habsburgs, especially in Spain. And historians still argue whether this was a primary factor in that branch's eventual collapse or just an unfortunate subplot. Still, even beyond genetics, the family itself struggled with competing priorities. Too many pretenders, too many territories, too many dynastic marriages that created obligations no one could fulfill. You watch as two Habsburg archdukes argue over succession, their voices low but full of bitterness. It's the same tone siblings use when they fight over who gets the good bedroom at grandma's house, but multiplied by entire provinces. You take another step and feel the floor tremble lightly, as if reacting to the chaos brewing beyond the next archway. You've arrived in the Chinese Qing dynasty as its final generations unravel. You see Empress Dowager Cixi reclining on a carved wooden platform, her face serene but her eyes constantly darting, calculating, assessing. She was powerful, charismatic, and often controversial. Historians still argue whether she protected the empire or accelerated its decline. But within the dynasty, her influence caused friction. Reformists and conservatives clashed, princes schemed for influence, and family infighting grew so intense that rumors of poisoning circulated like gossip at a school lunch table. A quirky tidbit floats your way. At one point, Cixi reportedly insisted that a puppet child emperor be dressed in yellow silk on days he didn't want to wear it, just because she liked the symbolism. When rulers control even wardrobe changes, you know someone feeling insecure. You keep walking, slipping through a tapestry and emerging into the waning years of the Joseon dynasty in Korea. The palace courtyards glow with lanterns, but the atmosphere feels brittle. Factions inside the royal family supported different reforms, different foreign alliances, even different visions for the future. Court politics shifted not annually, but daily. A mainstream fact: internal factionalism was a defining issue in late Joseon, with power blocks known as Sarim and Noron clashing repeatedly. You hear two princes debating whether to embrace modernization or cling to tradition. Historians still argue whether the dynasty might have survived longer had it reconciled those internal divisions sooner. And then you pass into what feels like a room made entirely of arguments, a melting pot of whispered conspiracies. You've stepped into the late Ottoman palace once again, but this time focusing on the family's growing fractures. Competing princes were often locked away in luxurious confinement. the infamous cave system, to prevent violent struggles. But that confinement also left many heirs unprepared to rule. You lean against a column as one prince, allowed out for the first time in years, anxiously examines a map upside down. It's dark comedy, but also tragic. Historians still argue whether protecting heirs from palace intrigue ultimately led to their incompetence. A soft breeze swirls, carrying with it voices of the crumbling Hawaiian monarchy. You step into Iolani Palace during the final days before its overthrow. Queen Liliuokalani faces not just foreign pressure but internal divisions among Hawaiian nobles, some supporting her reforms, others siding with wealthy influences from abroad. A quirky tidbit: the queen composed music during her imprisonment, including Aloha O, which still carries emotional weight today. Even in collapse, some dynasties produce beauty. You continue your walk, each step revealing the same quiet truth. Dynasties rarely fall because enemies overwhelm them. They fall because they cannot stop fighting among themselves long enough to stand united. The corridor narrows. The walls lean inward. You can almost hear 1,000 years worth of slammed doors and whispered betrayals. It's domestic chaos on a royal scale, Thanksgiving dinner gone nuclear, but with crowns instead of casseroles. And as you move toward the next section, you feel the gravity of it settle on your shoulders. No dynasty can rule the world if it can't rule its own living room. You take a slow breath as the corridor opens into a wider chamber, and the air develops a new texture, thin, strained, like a purse that's been emptied too many times. This is the world of collapsing treasuries and economies cracking beneath crowns, and you can almost hear the groan of ledgers buckling under centuries of excess. Your footsteps sound softer here, swallowed by carpets bought long ago when money felt endless, and kings believed gold simply regenerated behind the throne like a video game resource. A dynasty can survive poor leadership. It can survive a cranky heir, a questionable marriage, even a scheming advisor or two. But the moment the treasury starts wheezing, that's when things really get interesting, or terrifying, or both. You step forward into the late Roman Empire again, this time not for politics or rebellions, but for numbers, which, let's be honest, were not the Romans' strong point near the end. A mainstream fact lies at your feet like one of their old coins. By the empire's decline, inflation was so out of control that soldiers demanded payment in goods instead of money. Imagine being paid in wheat instead of a paycheck. Though given grocery prices today, maybe that doesn't sound so absurd. You run your hand along a cracked pillar where a tax edict hangs, faded and brittle. Historians still argue whether the empire's endless wars drained the treasury faster or whether their bloated bureaucracy did the real damage. Either way, the collapse wasn't just political, it was financial exhaustion. And honestly, exhaustion is one of the most relatable things ancient rulers ever gave us. You shift to your right and feel a soft pressure, like a chilly breeze made of old accounting errors. You've entered the twilight of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty. The room is lined with overflowing chests, but half of them contain IOUs to foreign lenders. The empire's global reach, great on paper, was horrendously expensive to maintain. A quirky tidbit floats past like a stray receipt. Spain declared state bankruptcy not once, not twice, but several times in the 16th and 17th centuries. It's the royal version of maxing out all your credit cards and asking the bank for just one more extension. Historians still argue whether the empire fell because it overspent on wars or because its overseas wealth gave rulers a false sense of security. You lean over a table where golden coins are being weighed, only to realize that half of them are counterfeit. Someone coughs awkwardly. Someone else pretends not to notice. Ah, yes, the universal sign of an economy in trouble. You continue on, and suddenly you find yourself in Hyanira, Japan, near the end of the Fujiwara clan's dominance. The room is filled with the soft rustle of silk as aristocrats compose poetry instead of attending to taxation. A samurai sighs in the corner, clearly aware he'll be the one to deal with the consequences later. Here, The economy didn't crash dramatically. It just slipped quietly out of aristocratic control. A mainstream fact. As land income shifted toward rising warrior families, the Fujiwara's wealth dwindled to ceremonial influence only. A quirky tidbit. Some Fujiwara nobles spent more on calligraphy brushes and incense than on actual governance. You watch one try to balance a household budget written entirely in poems. Let's just say the math is interpretive. You drift onward, and the corridor morphs into the opulent but dangerously unstable Mughal treasury. Mountains of jewelry sparkle under candlelight, but you feel the hollowness beneath the glitter. The empire's vast wealth had begun to evaporate through corruption, poorly managed provinces, and constant military campaigns. You pick up a jeweled dagger and immediately put it down, both because it's heavy and because you don't want to be implicated in whatever scandal it caused centuries ago. Historians still argue whether the Mughal collapse was primarily economic or political, but from where you stand, it's clear both forces fed each other like two snakes swallowing each other's tails. A quirky tidbit. One Mughal noble allegedly spent the modern equivalent of $20 million on his daughter's wedding. You can almost hear the treasury screaming from across the palace. You step through a curtain that ripples like liquid gold and find yourself in the exhausted final years of the Ottoman Empire. You can feel the weight of debt here like humidity. You don't see it, but it clings to you. Foreign creditors line the walls in ghostly silence, each one representing loans the Sultanate could no longer repay. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration, yes, an actual international committee, essentially took control of the empire's finances. A mainstream fact. By the 19th century, major European powers were overseeing Ottoman revenues. You shiver as a clerk flips through ledger pages filled with red ink. Historians still argue whether these financial shackles doomed the empire earlier than necessary or merely formalized a decline already in motion. But one thing is certain. Nothing screams dynasty in trouble like other countries babysitting your budget. You move on and the atmosphere becomes harsher, colder. You've reached the late Qing dynasty again, but this time the problem is silver, or rather the lack of it. Economic turmoil swept the empire as imported opium drained silver reserves, tax systems failed, and modernization required resources no one had. You pick up a piece of broken porcelain stamped with an imperial seal, and it feels strangely light, symbolic, maybe, of promises the treasury could no longer keep. A quirky detail whispers by. Some reports claim corrupt officials used hollowed-out bamboo poles to smuggle tax silver out of government storehouses. Imagine losing your empire to sneaky bamboo thieves. As you walk, the corridor subtly tilts downward. It feels like descending into dynastic basements filled with unpaid bills, abandoned reforms, and rulers who definitely should have hired better accountants. You pause at a final doorway. The Bourbon monarchy of pre-revolutionary France. The palace is dazzling, but the financial rot is unmistakable. Ballrooms sparkle while taxpayers groan. You step into a room where Louis XVI frowns over financial reports he barely understands. Historians still argue whether he could have saved the monarchy with faster reforms, or whether bankruptcy made revolution inevitable. A quirky tidbit lingers in the air. At one point, the monarchy spent so much on silk, opera, and palace repairs that the finance minister secretly published the national budget to shame the court into behaving. Spoiler, it didn't work. And as you leave the chamber, you feel the truth settle over you like a heavy velvet curtain. Dynasties can handle wars, plagues, and political drama. But the money, when that cracks, everything cracks. The crown, the army, the rituals, all of it. You keep walking as the floor steadies again, ready for whatever comes next. You wake with a faint ache in your legs that I've walked through too many collapsing palace corridors lately, kind of ache, and you barely have time to stretch before the air around you shifts again. The scenery blurs, the temperature warms, and a low hum of chanting rises like incense from the ground itself. When your vision clears, You're no longer among generals or crumbling walls. You're in the heart of a kingdom where faith isn't just a private matter. It's the throne's foundation, and sometimes the spark that burns the throne down. You find yourself standing at the edge of an ornate ceremonial courtyard. Incense smoke curls upward in thick spirals, perfumed with spices and resins so potent you can almost taste them. You inhale, and the air coats your lungs with sweetness and something metallic beneath it. A sign of power, sure, but also a sign of fear. Because when faith turns on a palace, the first warning is always in the air. You take a cautious step forward, moving past carved columns where mythic beasts twist around each other in eternal struggle. Courtiers shuffle by in silk and gold, their eyes sharp, their whispers sharper. Their conversations are laced with the same tone you've heard in every doomed dynasty so far, anxiety disguised as devotion. You've walked into a world where rulers are expected not just to govern but to embody divine favor. And when that favor feels shaky, when droughts hit, or omens sour, or prophets mumble things better left unsaid, entire governments tremble. A priest sweeps past you, robes skimming the tiles. His face is stern but worried, as if he's carrying a prophecy he wishes had never arrived. You follow behind him, weaving through the courtyard until the walls open into a massive hall lit by oil lamps. Inside, a king sits upon an impossibly ornate throne carved from a single slab of dark wood. Patterns spiral outward like galaxies. The artistry is breathtaking, but the king's shoulders slump. You can tell he's beginning to doubt. And doubt is contagious. You drift closer, blending in with the flow of attendants. Up close, the ruler looks both regal and brittle, like a statue that might crack if someone sneezes too hard. His fingers tap anxiously against the armrest, a steady rhythm that betrays the calm mask he's trying to maintain. His crown gleams, but he doesn't look like he feels worthy of its weight. Historians still argue whether the collapse of kingdoms driven by faith is caused by spiritual fear, political opportunism, or just really unfortunate timing. But whatever the reason, you're watching that uncertainty ignite right in front of you. The high priest steps forward and bows deeply. Your Majesty, the signs persist. The comet has not faded. Oh boy, nothing good has ever followed a statement beginning with "the signs persist." You can almost feel the ruler's heartbeat pick up. And the drought, he asks. Worsening. Around you, murmurs ripple through the hall. The courtiers shift uneasily, eyes darting. To them, natural events are not natural, they're divine judgments. And judgment in this world feels like a blade hovering over the throne. One whisper reaches your ears. The ancestors withdraw their blessing. Another, if the spirits have abandoned him, the dynasty ends. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. A tiny, harmless joke here, but still PG-13, of course. The whole place feels like a powder keg built from prayer scrolls and political grudges. You've seen this pattern before. A ruler presiding over a firmly established religious system suddenly finds their authority tested by omens, extremism, or charismatic new prophets. Belief, once a stabilizing force, becomes a battlefield. A court scholar, bold or foolish, or possibly both, steps forward. He unrolls a parchment covered in precise inked characters. "My king," he says, "some of the people speak of the ascetic in the northern hills. They say he has performed wonders. They say he claims the spirit's call for repentance." The king's jaw tightens. A wandering hermit now challenges my rule. You can practically hear his thoughts. Not today. Not on top of the comet, the drought, and the gossip. A guard whispers at your side. "I heard that hermit fasts for weeks and still walks for miles. My cousin said he predicted a landslide that happened 3 days later." You nod in that vague, "I'm totally pretending to belong here" way. But internally you're thinking, great, a miracle-working mystic, just what every unstable dynasty needs. It's a mainstream historical fact that many real-world dynasties were destabilized by religious reformers, from charismatic monks to zealous prophets to movements that grew faster than rulers could control. And right now, you're watching exactly how that dynamic takes root. The king stands abruptly. Enough! His voice echoes off the carved beams. But even you can hear the tremor in it. Doubt, fear, and something else. A tiny crack running right through the middle of his certainty. Later, you slip away from the hall and wander through the palace gardens. The moon hangs high above, illuminating winding paths framed by lotus ponds and lantern-lit pavilions. It should be peaceful, should be calming, but the atmosphere feels charged, like the moment just before a summer storm. Crickets chirp, water drips into stone basins. A few servants hurry past whispering about sacrifices being increased. You catch one phrase. If the king has lost heaven's mandate. Ah, there it is. When faith turns against the palace, people start looking upward before they look to their ruler. You sit by a pond where koi fish swirl beneath the surface. Their movements distort your reflection, stretching your face in long, wavy patterns. It matches your mood, confused, concerned, maybe even a little seasick. As you watch the moon ripple, you hear quiet footsteps. A royal advisor approaches, hands clasped behind his back. His expression is the exact opposite of reassuring. This kingdom rests on spiritual balance, he tells you softly, not even asking who you are. Apparently you give off wandering, confident vibes. If the signs say the spirits disapprove, the people will turn. So you'll fix it, you ask. He gives you a tired smile. We cannot fix the will of heaven, only interpret it. Which is advisor speak for. We're winging it and praying it works. Morning arrives with harsh sunlight and an even harsher rumor. The hermit from the northern hills has gained followers, hundreds of them, and they're marching toward the capital. People gather in the streets. Their faces reflect hope, fear, or the very dangerous mixture of both. Merchants shutter their stalls, guards tighten their grips on spears, and priests scurry between temples trying to calm the public with ritual smoke and ceremonial bells. The king appears on a balcony overlooking the courtyard. The crowd below quiets instantly. You're close enough to see sweat collecting at his temples. My people, he calls, the spirits have guided us since the dawn of our ancestors. Their wisdom has never failed, and it does not fail now. Strong opening, good posture, you give him an 8-10 so far. But, he continues, not all who claim spiritual visions are chosen. Okay, down to a 6-10, the crowd stiffens. Anger flares in pockets, someone shouts, then why do the signs condemn you? Woof. Even from here, you feel the blow. Another voice yells, let the hermit speak. Another, maybe he carries the true mandate. The king's face drains of color, and in that moment, with sunlight hitting him from behind, with the crowd muttering, with his power teetering, you see it clearly. Faith has slipped from his grasp. He is no longer the interpreter of divine will. He is its possible target. The palace goes into lockdown. Priests argue behind closed doors. Some swear the king still has heaven's blessing. Others fear the comet overhead means something else. Servants leap out of each other's way. Soldiers pace the corridors like caged animals. You retreat to the inner courtyard where a shrine emits the sweet smell of burning sandalwood. You run a hand along the carved railings, feeling grooves worn by centuries of devotion. This place, once a sanctuary, now feels like an arena. Suddenly, the advisor reappears beside you. The king wants to meet with the hermit, he says, in secret. Your eyebrows rise. A ruler making secret concessions to a rival prophet. That's never a sign of strength. But you follow anyway, because apparently insomnia has made you into a part-time spiritual crisis consultant. You're led through servant corridors and narrow stairways until you reach a small chamber lit only by a single oil lamp. Inside, The king stands face to face with the hermit, a thin, weathered man with eyes like burning coals. You can tell instantly why people follow him. He has that unnerving calm found in those convinced the universe personally answers their emails. You claim heaven speaks to you, the king says quietly. The hermit bows. Heaven speaks to all, some simply listen. You wince, diplomacy, 0 points. The king's voice sharpens. Then listen now. If your words inspire revolt, you will doom thousands. The hermit's answer is slow, calm, devastating. Your Majesty, the drought is not my doing. It is heaven. There it is, the moment the palace loses control of the narrative. It's not swords that topple kingdoms like this. It's belief. Once the people think divinity has shifted sides, rulers become mortals again. Hours later, you stand outside the city gates as crowds gather on both sides, palace loyalists on one, spiritual reformists on the other. No battle has started, and maybe it never will, but the air crackles with impending change. A dynasty doesn't need to be destroyed physically. Sometimes it collapses when faith simply reroutes. And you're standing right where that rerouting begins. The king appears on horseback, flanked by guards. His expression is unreadable, part defiance, part surrender. The hermit approaches from the opposite side, walking barefoot on the dust, his followers silent as shadows behind him. No swords are drawn, no screams erupt, but you feel history tightening around you like a noose. The ruler dismounts, moves forward, and bows his head. Only slightly, but enough. Enough for the people to see. Enough for the dynasty to tremble. Enough for faith to finish what omens began. As the sun sinks behind the palace walls, you realize you've just witnessed the worst fate a ruler can suffer in a faith-bound kingdom. Losing the story that kept their crown in place. And once a ruler loses the story, well, the palace never stands for long. You glide into the grand Vienna palaces, the heavy scent of polished wood and candle wax curling around your senses. The Habsburg dynasty's twilight is already pressing in, and you feel it like the weight of centuries settling onto your shoulders. You probably won't survive the sheer number of portraits staring at you without noticing that every powdered wig, every gilded frame, seems to scowl or whisper secrets from centuries past. The dynasty's pride is palpable, yet fragile, fraying at the edges where wars, debts, and endless arranged marriages pull the threads taut until they snap. Inside the gilded halls, you watch the emperors and empresses move with ceremonious grace, their every gesture choreographed to project control, dignity, and divine right. Behind closed doors, though, intrigue bubbles like a forgotten stew. Advisors mutter about policies they will never implement. Courtiers angle for tiny favors, and lovers, whispers slither through secret passages. You trudge past mirrored corridors and remember the odd habit of one Habsburg, who insisted on having his dinner in complete darkness, claiming it sharpened his other senses. A small, quirky distraction from the immense pressures of rule. Historians still argue whether the dynasty's eventual collapse was inevitable or a consequence of repeated mismanagement, though the evidence of systemic overreach feels undeniable as you pass through each opulent chamber. The weight of alliances, mostly cemented through marriages, bears down like an unrelenting fog. You glimpse a young archduke practicing etiquette he has not yet internalized, a daughter being tutored in multiple languages to secure a distant crown, each lesson a quiet chain linking one nation to another. Outside, wars loom like distant thunderstorms. The Habsburgs' holdings stretch across mountains, rivers, and seas, yet every new frontier creates fresh vulnerabilities. You hear faint echoes of battles and sieges, the empire's peripheries always restless, reminding you that dynasties do not fall in palaces, they crumble across entire continents. Amid these pressures, superstition and ritual cling stubbornly. You notice the astrologers poring over charts, the alchemists promising gold or longevity, and the whisper of omens that might have altered decisions if anyone truly believed them. Courtiers fear being in the wrong place at the wrong time, for even a glance can turn into suspicion, a favor into a betrayal. Poisoned letters, double-crossed alliances, and secret debts thread through every story you overhear, tiny pressures that collectively nudge the mighty toward ruin. Fringe accounts suggest hidden tunnels under the palace where scandals were whispered into the walls to protect reputations or blackmail rivals. No one knows the truth for sure, and historians still argue about their very existence. You wander the palace gardens, the air thick with roses and the quiet hum of bees. Here, away from the mirrors and tapestries, the dynasty's human side surfaces. A lonely emperor walking alone, an empress confiding in a pet parrot, a chambermaid hearing whispers meant for higher ears. Each anecdote seems trivial in isolation, but together they form the mosaic of decline, the microcosms of neglect, ambition, and superstition, eroding the foundation of centuries-old rule. You probably won't survive the full scale of dynastic exhaustion without pausing, but the patterns become clear. A dynasty is only as stable as its courtiers are honest, its heirs are capable, and its rituals retain meaning. As evening falls, the golden light catches the palace spires, casting long shadows over statues that have watched generations rise and fall. The city outside hums with life that the dynasty can barely touch, commerce and culture flowing independently of courtly whims. You feel the paradox of grandeur and fragility, opulence and exhaustion, and you begin to understand that the Habsburgs' collapse was less a cataclysm than a slow, inexorable slide. The combined weight of ambition, mismanagement, superstition, and human vanity pushing one of history's most dazzling dynasties toward memory. The echoes of whispered schemes and poisoned favors linger like faint perfume, a reminder that even the grandest palaces cannot hold time at bay. You trudge through the overgrown ruins of Mayan city-states, feeling the sticky humidity cling to your skin as moss and vines curl around the remnants of stone pyramids. The great plazas, once thrumming with ceremonial life, now echo only with the chirping of cicadas and the distant calls of howler monkeys. You probably won't survive a full day in this sun-drenched jungle without sweating through your shirt, but there's a peculiar thrill in imagining the grandeur that once reigned here. You brush aside creeping roots and step onto worn staircases, where glyphs etched into stone whisper stories of rulers long gone, their power fading into mystery. Scholars still argue whether climate change, warfare, or internal political fragmentation finished the Maya, but what's undeniable is the eerie sense of absence that permeates every corner. The plazas had hosted elaborate rituals, and even now, traces of ritual objects emerge from the dirt. Obsidian blades, broken pottery, and oddly carved figurines whose purpose is debated. You stumble across a curious stone altar, its surface pitted with what could be ceremonial scorch marks, or just erosion. Fringe theories suggest secret tunnels beneath the pyramids where treasures or sacrificial remains were hidden. You feel the thrill of possibility but also the weight of not knowing, that delicious historical uncertainty. Amid the grandeur, there's evidence of collapse, crumbling aqueducts, abandoned palaces and plazas overtaken by weeds. You can almost hear the echoes of chants, drums, and the frantic footfalls of courtiers and commoners alike as the political system started to unravel. You wander past the Temple of the Inscriptions, its hieroglyphs still faintly glowing in the warm light, and pause to consider the Mayas' sophisticated understanding of astronomy and calendars. Their achievements were astounding: precise observations, monumental architecture, and complex political networks spanning hundreds of miles. And yet, something cracked. Perhaps it was a prolonged drought that dried the reservoirs, perhaps internecine war between rival city-states, perhaps a combination of multiple calamities that, together, overwhelmed the social structure. The jungle conceals these secrets well, and even archaeologists uncover only fragments of the truth. Amid this decay, small human stories emerge. You notice footprints pressed into soft earth that are surprisingly recent, local villagers, descendants of the original inhabitants, performing quiet rituals, leaving offerings to ancestors. A quirky artifact catches your eye, a clay whistle shaped like a jaguar, once played to summon rain or invoke spirits. These tangible echoes of culture reveal resilience even in abandonment, a whisper of continuity amid collapse. You probably won't survive the solitude here without reflecting on the fleetingness of empires, but the lesson emerges gently. No matter how advanced or imposing, civilizations are vulnerable to forces beyond their control, from environmental stress to political miscalculations. As you climb to the summit of a central pyramid, the jungle stretches endlessly in every direction. The sun dips behind a distant ridge, casting long shadows over the silent city. You imagine the last rulers packing the stone terraces, unsure whether to call for retreat, negotiation, or ritual appeasement. Their subjects, once bustling through marketplaces and temples, had begun to leave, seeking water, food, and security elsewhere. The silence now envelopes the city, a stark contrast to the vibrant spectacle that defined its peak. And as night falls, the sounds of nocturnal creatures fill the void, a gentle reminder that nature persists where empires falter, reclaiming spaces once dominated by human ambition. The Maya's collapse feels less like a dramatic fall and more like a soft slipping away, a gradual surrender to time, environment, and circumstance. You take a last glance at the stone faces and towering temples, letting the warmth of the fading sun wash over you, and you carry with you the quiet, almost eerie lesson. Greatness can vanish almost imperceptibly, leaving only echoes and mysteries for later generations to puzzle over. The ruins are silent now, but they still hum with stories, waiting for those willing to listen. You climb higher into the Andes, the wind whipping around you as the clouds drift lazily through the valleys below, carrying the scent of earth and cold stone. The Inca Empire's collapse stretches out in front of you like a grand, jagged puzzle that you can't quite piece together. You probably won't survive imagining the empire at its peak without your head spinning from the sheer scale, roads that thread mountains like silver ribbons, terraces carved into cliffs, cities perched on precarious heights, and the ever-present hum of life that once filled every corner. And yet, in this high-altitude silence, you can feel the weight of inevitability pressing down. The Spanish arrive on the horizon, steel and gunpowder flashing where once only stone and obsidian reigned. You watch from the terraces of Machu Picchu, or at least imagine it as it must have been, where couriers race along the Inca road system delivering urgent messages, the knots of quipu dangling like coded whispers of impending doom. The empire, already bruised by internal civil war between Huascar and Atahualpa, trembles under the weight of betrayal, disease, and foreign weapons. Historians still argue whether the Spanish conquest alone toppled the Inca, or if internal fractures had already rendered the empire fragile. But either way, you can feel the tension, like a rope stretched too tightly across mountain passes. As you trudge along the terraces, you notice the odd, almost whimsical relics left behind: ceramic llamas, small figurines meant for ritual, and oddly shaped stone tools that may have had practical or ceremonial purposes. Fringe tailies speak of hidden caches of gold, melted and lost to rivers, or secret shrines where the last emperors hid sacred objects. You probably won't survive long imagining the chaos inside Cusco, where nobles debated surrender, spiritual leaders prophesied doom, and commoners tried desperately to maintain daily life, while the world shifted under their feet. The empire's collapse was as much about human error as foreign intrusion, a combination of ambition, fear, and miscalculated loyalty that echoes faintly through the Andean peaks. You drift into the villages below, where remnants of the once great road system still hint at communication networks that rivaled Europe's medieval messengers. Farmers and artisans carry on as best they can, oblivious to the political machinations high above. Yet their labor and adaptation are part of the subtle story of survival that persists beyond dynastic endings. In the grand halls of Cusco, the last Inca rulers face impossible choices: negotiate with the Spaniards and risk betrayal, hide in the mountains and risk starvation, or assert authority and risk annihilation. Every decision carries consequences, and every whisper from advisors, priests, and generals presses like weight on their shoulders. You probably won't survive pondering the combination of nature, disease, betrayal, and ambition that unraveled one of the greatest empires the Americas ever knew without feeling a shiver run down your spine. The Inca roads curl like serpents through clouds, the terraces remain, and the stone walls stand silent, mocking your attempts to fully comprehend their genius and tragedy. And yet, there is beauty here amid collapse, a harmony between human ingenuity and the unforgiving mountains, a reminder that even in ruin, the echoes of culture endure. As dusk settles over the Andes, the wind carries faint whispers of quippus untied, of ceremonies abandoned, of gold melted into rivers and silver hidden in the shadows. You pause, imagining the last Inca standing atop a stone platform, eyes scanning the horizon, knowing the empire could not endure forever. And you feel the lesson. Even the most organized, ambitious, and seemingly invincible dynasties are vulnerable to a confluence of internal division and external force, leaving behind awe-inspiring ruins, haunting mysteries, and stories that refuse to fade completely. You drift under Alexandria's silvered moonlight, the harbor whispering with the gentle lap of waves against the quays, as the Ptolemaic dynasty teeters on its final edge. You probably won't survive the mix of opulence and tension without a shiver, but the city's scent, salt, papyrus, and burned oil, draws you deeper into the story. Cleopatra moves like a shadow among marble columns, her jeweled bracelets catching the moonlight, while Roman legions wait just beyond the city gates. The dynasty's end is not a sudden collapse, but a slow, deliberate unraveling, where loyalty, cunning, and love intertwine with politics in ways that feel almost theatrical. You follow the last rulers through their sunlit halls, noting the intricate frescoes and mosaics depicting gods, kings, and serpents intertwined, a constant reminder of divine favor, or its withdrawal. Religious movements have begun to press in, nudging decisions and alliances. Temples echo with whispered debates among priests who claim visions of the dynasty's downfall, while fringe cults rise in shadowed corners, promising secret protection from fate. You probably won't survive the dizzying web of influence without pausing to admire Cleopatra's clever manipulations. Alliances with Caesar, then Antony, negotiations steeped in beauty, intelligence, and lethal charm. Historians still argue whether the Ptolemaic dynasty could have survived without Roman interference, yet the tension is palpable even now. The Nile flows lazily beside you, carrying stories of prosperity and betrayal. You spot minor courtiers and advisors exchanging furtive glances, letters slipped between fingers, plots whispered behind fans. Rumors tell of secret gatherings where astrologers interpret omens, priests deliver cryptic warnings, and servants pass messages that could shift the fate of empires. Even a stray cat padding along the mosaic floor seems to move with purpose, perhaps a silent witness to centuries of intrigue. You feel the pull of superstition and human ambition entwined, the dynasty's strengths and weaknesses mirrored in these small acts, every whisper, glance, and misstep nudging history forward. Outside the palace, Alexandria pulses with life, markets thronging with traders from distant lands, the smell of spices hanging in the air, and the faint clatter of oars from ships laden with grain. Cleopatra's influence reaches beyond the marble walls, yet the dynasty's political foundations crumble under both internal dissent and foreign pressure. Oddly, fringe tailies hint at hidden treasure troves buried beneath the city, sacred relics whisked away under the cover of night, and secret tunnels connecting palaces to temples. You probably won't survive pondering the mixture of legend, fact, and conjecture here without your imagination running wild. But these whispers are part of the dynasty's fatting aura, a reminder of its grandeur and fragility. You pause at the edge of the harbor, watching moonlight scatter across rippling water, imagining the final moments when decisions made in velvet chambers reach the soldiers on the quay. Cleopatra's strategies, Antony's boldness, and Rome's inexorable pressure converge in a climax that history remembers but cannot fully capture. You trudge along the cobbled paths, nodding every broken column and vine-draped wall, sensing the weight of centuries pressing into the present. The Ptolemaic dynasty's last days are a tapestry woven from power, ambition, love, and superstition, where the whispers of the gods mingle with the shouts of men, and the line between legend and history blurs in the silvered light. By dawn, the city holds its breath. The Nile reflects the first hints of sun, promising renewal even as dynasties fall. You probably won't survive the drama and elegance of these final hours without feeling the tug of both awe and melancholy. The Ptolemies vanish into history, leaving behind ruins, stories, and that peculiar sense that empires, no matter how cunning or charismatic, cannot forever withstand the tides of change. You trudge along the Great Wall at sunrise, the mist curling around the stone like ghostly ribbons, as the Ming dynasty teeters on the edge of collapse. You probably won't survive the biting cold and dizzying height without shivering, but the mountains spread before you, grand and eternal, mirroring the dynasty's former might. The air smells of pine resin and distant smoke from village hearths, faint reminders that the world continues even as a great empire falters. Here, in the quiet of the ramparts, the threads of fiscal collapse, peasant rebellion, and bureaucratic decay weave together into a tapestry that feels both inevitable and tragic. You wander past watchtowers, imagining the soldiers once stationed here, alert for northern incursions that never came in time. The Ming court, flush with tradition and ceremony, is collapsing under the weight of its own bureaucracy. Officials line their pockets, provincial governors wield power like small kings, and the imperial treasury runs dry. Fringe tailies whisper of eunuchs hiding treasures in secret vaults, of scholars predicting the dynasty's demise with cryptic verses, and of loyal generals torn between duty and self-preservation. Historians still argue whether the dynasty fell primarily due to corruption, rebellion, or the pressures of external threats, but standing on these stones, the answer feels like a mix of all three. Inside the Forbidden City, the emperor moves among ornate halls that have long ceased to radiate security. The air smells faintly of incense and burned paper, the latter from edicts hastily shredded to avoid scandal. You probably won't survive imagining the endless bureaucracy, the countless petitions ignored, or the meticulous rituals performed by officials more concerned with survival than governance. Peasant revolts ignite far from the marble floors, yet their echoes reach the heart of the empire through reports delivered by exhausted messengers. The dynasty is teetering on a knife edge. Each rebellion, famine, and mismanaged tax collection another small push toward collapse. You drift through grand gardens, nodding the sculptures of dragons and phoenixes, symbols of power meant to inspire awe but now tinged with melancholy. Oddly, you spot small ritual objects left by monks and court priests, incense burners, prayer beads, and tiny carved figurines, suggesting attempts to placate fortune or curry divine favor. These gestures, trivial in isolation, collectively speak to the anxiety gripping every level of society. You see concubines whispering behind silken screens, eunuchs scurrying with secret messages, and ministers plotting quietly, their intrigues as intricate as the painted ceilings above. You probably won't survive the quiet tension without feeling the weight of inevitability pressing down. Outside, peasant armies march, banners waving in the morning sun, while local bandits exploit the chaos to seize villages and granaries. Natural disasters, floods, famines, pestilence, compound the crisis, stripping the emperor of legitimacy in the eyes of his people. Even loyal generals struggle to maintain order, torn between enforcing law and negotiating survival. You trudge along abandoned city gates, imagining the fear and indecision of those inside, the subtle nudges that turn hesitation into catastrophe. The Ming dynasty's end is not a single spectacular collapse, but a slow, grinding erosion of power, legitimacy, and faith. By evening, the mountains glimmer with fading sunlight, and the wall stretches like a scar across the land, silent witness to centuries of ambition and folly. You probably won't survive the combination of nature's relentlessness, human error, and political mismanagement without a moment of awe and melancholy. The dynasty lingers in memory, in stone, in ritual remnants, yet the echo is unmistakable. Even empires built on ceremony, discipline, and monumental architecture are vulnerable to the convergence of internal rot and external pressures. The Great Wall, like the dynasty itself, stands as both a testament to ingenuity and a reminder of impermanence. You wander into the mirrored halls of Versailles, the golden chandeliers catching the late afternoon light and scattering it across ornate ceilings, while the Bourbon monarchy teeters on the edge of catastrophe. You probably won't survive the dizzying extravagance without feeling faintly vertiginous, but the scent of candle wax, polished wood, and faint perfume pulls you into the rhythm of a court poised for collapse. Every portraited ancestor seems to glare, reminding you that dynasties are both weighty and fragile, and the decadent rituals here are less about devotion than the desperate projection of control. You glide past courtiers in elaborate silk, their powdered faces frozen in polite smiles concealing ambitions, resentments, and secret alliances. Even a whisper can topple a reputation. Even a glance can ignite suspicion. Peasant unrest rumbles far beyond the gilded gates, yet inside, the court operates as if insulated from reality. Fringe accounts suggest that some courtiers employed secret passageways to deliver scandalous messages or plot subtle acts of sabotage, a reminder that intrigue is often the quietest, deadliest force in a declining dynasty. Historians still argue whether the monarchy's collapse could have been delayed with more radical reform, but standing among these opulent halls, the signs of decay are undeniable. Excessive debt, mismanagement, and public disillusionment gnawing at the edges of royal power. The gardens stretch endlessly, fountains gurgling with artful precision, while the scent of roses masks the underlying tension. You trudge along gravel paths imagining Louis XVI packing alone, murmuring about finances he cannot control, while Marie Antoinette entertains guests with refined grace, masking her anxiety with laughter. Petty rivalries, secret romances, and whispered alliances thread through every pavilion and terrace. You probably won't survive the relentless gossip and scheming without marveling at how human ambition and vanity quietly erode empires from within. Even the most lavish parties conceal fractures, suppliers unpaid, soldiers hungry, and citizens increasingly restless. You peek into a small chamber where letters detailing public grievances lie piled in corners, ignored by officials too absorbed in ceremony to respond. Outside, pamphlets circulate with dangerous swiftness, fueling dissent with words sharp as swords. Soldiers are deployed to quiet unrest, yet they hesitate, caught between duty and the palpable sense that the dynasty is faltering. Even astrology and omens are consulted, the court desperate for reassurance from signs, ritual, or prophecy. You notice a playful detail. A court jester smuggles minor truths into performances, mocking policies just enough to make those in power squirm, tiny nudges of awareness in a palace otherwise suspended in denial. By twilight, the halls are drenched in orange light, casting elongated shadows over the marble floors. You probably won't survive the full weight of this collapse without shivering at the inevitability, yet there is a strange poetry in it. A monarchy clinging to ceremony, while the world beyond the gates moves inexorably toward revolution. The guillotine waits, literal and metaphorical, for those who have ignored the slow erosion of loyalty and legitimacy. You walk past mirrors reflecting the fragile opulence, sensing that every jewel, tapestry, and ornate railing tells the story of pride, excess, and quiet mismanagement. The Bourbons' last days are a delicate dance of denial, indulgence, and human foibles, a reminder that even crowns of gold cannot resist the currents of change. You drift among the moss-clad stone faces of Angkor as twilight softens the horizon, the crumbling temples towering above you like sleeping giants. The Khmer Empire's decline feels almost sacred here, a quiet surrender of human ambition to jungle and time. You probably won't survive the thick humidity and the endless echo of cicadas without feeling every bead of sweat as a tiny testament to resilience. But the air itself hums with history, and with the strange energy of civilizations quietly slipping away. The canals and reservoirs, once marvels of hydraulic engineering, lie partially silted and overgrown, their perfect symmetry now a whisper of control lost. You trudge through corridors of intricate bas-reliefs depicting battles, processions, and deities, imagining the kings and priests walking these paths in full ceremonial dress. Faith had long been a spine supporting the empire, yet over time, even devotion could not stop erosion. You sense the subtle pressures of religion turning against political power. New cults, spiritual debates, and unexplained omens that increasingly influence decisions in the royal court. Fringe stories whisper of hidden chambers where sacred rituals were performed to stave off disaster, of secret sacrifices whose purpose historians still debate. You probably won't survive the layers of mysticism, politics, and human ambition without pausing to let it all sink in. The temple's stone faces seem to watch as you navigate the overgrown walkways. You notice small offerings tucked into cracks, flowers, coins, incense, remnants of locals' continuing rituals centuries later. Even as the empire falters, the culture persists in these subtle acts, a reminder that civilization leaves echoes beyond the reach of kings. Meanwhile, the power struggles within the palace, once decisive and violent, fade into obscurity, replaced by bureaucratic inertia, court intrigues, and a slow drift of authority away from central control. Historians still argue whether environmental degradation, warfare, or economic collapse truly ended Angkor, but the evidence is palpable. Abandoned terraces, cracked reservoirs, and jungles reclaiming roads once alive with processions. You wander past the central temple, its steps worn smooth by countless feet, imagining the final kings packing nervously, their advisors whispering prophecies and warnings. You see minor courtiers sneaking messages, eunuchs carrying instructions between temples, and priests debating rituals that may or may not have any power to influence fate. You probably won't survive the mounting tension and slow inevitability without feeling the quiet hum of decay. Every misplaced brick, every eroded carving, every overgrown pond is a reminder of authority slipping away unnoticed. As dusk deepens, fireflies light up the jungle like distant stars, and the great stone faces of Angkor seem to watch over the remnants of an empire that could not endure. The canals murmur faintly, the jungle exhales, and you feel the delicate balance of human achievement and nature's reclaiming force. Even in abandonment, the empire whispers its lessons, that faith, power, and ambition can create wonders, but even wonders cannot escape the slow pull of circumstance, neglect, and time. You take a last glance at the temple spires, moss and vines swallowing stone, and realize that Angkor's story is one of quiet persistence and the humbling reminder that empires, no matter how grand, are never permanent. You tread softly through the fatting splendor of Kyoto, the autumn leaves crunching beneath your feet as the city exhales its history in quiet gusts. The transition from the Azuchi Momoyama period to Tokugawa rule feels like walking on a tightrope stretched across centuries. You probably won't survive the intricate layers of samurai politics, palace intrigue, and ritualized power without feeling dizzy from the constant motion of alliances and betrayals, but the air hums with it nonetheless. Every shrine, every lacquered hall, and every tea house carries the residue of fatting lords and rising shoguns, a delicate dance between tradition and pragmatism. You navigate narrow corridors and wooden staircases, catching glimpses of samurai in ceremonial armor practicing drills, their movements precise yet shadowed with tension. The last warlords cling to influence through elaborate networks of retainers, secret pacts, and quiet intimidation. Oddly, some of these men carry talismans or recite prayers meant to safeguard their fates, superstitions that historians still debate for their actual impact versus symbolic comfort. Fringe tales speak of samurai assassins hidden in plain sight, whispering the downfall of rivals while maintaining the outward appearance of loyalty. You probably won't survive imagining the constant pressure without a mental note to breathe. Every glance, every step, could carry monumental consequences. The city's palaces are a theater of etiquette and subtlety. You watch courtiers exchanging delicate bows and coded phrases, where one slip might be fatal, one favor a subtle trap. Tea ceremonies, often seen as tranquil moments of reflection, conceal intricate diplomacy, messages encoded in the placement of cups, gestures, and the choice of sweets. You catch a faint scent of incense wafting from a shrine, reminding you that faith, ritual, and superstition are silent partners in governance. Peasants and merchants bustle in the alleys below, largely unaware of the high-stakes maneuvering overhead, yet their labor sustains the very structure of power teetering above them. You climb to a veranda overlooking Kyoto's winding streets, imagining the last daimyo packing, weighing loyalty, military strength, and the pressures of a nation hungry for stability. Oddly enough, one warlord maintained a collection of exotic birds, believing their songs could predict the outcomes of battles, a quirky reminder of human attempts to control fate. Historians still argue whether the Tokugawa shogunate's rise was inevitable or a fortunate alignment of circumstance, but from your vantage point, you can see the fragile threads that tip dynasties. Every alliance, every betrayal, and every whispered counsel nudges the balance of power in ways both subtle and profound. Night falls, lanterns flickering along Kyoto's streets and reflecting off the lacquered panels of fatting palaces. You probably won't survive the tension and beauty without a deep inhale, letting the city's hum sink into your bones. The old samurai and warlords vanish into history, leaving behind streets, shrines, and the quiet resonance of rituals, battles, and political maneuverings. And as the wind rustles the last leaves of autumn, you feel the lesson seep in. Dynasties, no matter how disciplined, clever, or fortified, can fall not with a thunderous crash but with a soft, inexorable drift, guided by ambition, superstition, and the subtle currents of human nature. You glide through the snow-covered corridors of St. Petersburg, the bitter winter air stinging your cheeks as the Romanov dynasty faces its final hours. You probably won't survive the chill and the weight of history pressing in without shivering, but the city exhales a peculiar mixture of opulence and unease. Golden chandeliers reflect in icy window panes, the scent of burning pine mingling with expensive perfumes, and the echoes of carriage wheels sound like the rhythm of a dying heartbeat. The Romanovs, long accustomed to grandeur and ceremonial display, now teeter under the combined pressures of war, revolution, and a populace weary of inequity. Inside the Winter Palace, corridors hum with nervous energy. Courtiers shuffle papers, whispering advice, schemes, and fears in equal measure. The Tsar, isolated yet aware of every flicker of unrest, moves through the halls with measured steps, while his family carries on as though tradition could shield them from chaos. Fringe stories tell of hidden letters, secret staircases, and minor nobles plotting in quiet desperation. You probably won't survive imagining all the intersecting schemes without losing track of which whispers matter most. Historians still argue whether the Romanovs might have survived with different political choices, yet the signs of systemic collapse are impossible to ignore. Mutinies, strikes, and the slow erosion of trust between ruler and subjects. You follow servants through shadowed corridors, catching glimpses of pets, dogs, cats, and even a capuchin monkey, moving among the royals as unlikely confidants and comic relief. Odd little anecdotes like these remind you that even amidst empire-ending turmoil, human quirks persist, You trudge past portraits of long-dead Romanovs, their painted eyes seeming to watch present events with quiet judgment, as advisors argue endlessly over strategy, morale, and whether to flee or negotiate. The air is thick with the tension of inevitability, every footstep echoing like the drums of a coming storm. Outside, the snow crunches under marching feet, soldiers loyal, hesitant, or rebellious, all pressing against the gates of the palace. Rumors drift through the city, strikes, protests, and whispered mutinies, growing louder each day. You probably won't survive the interplay of fear, loyalty, and human frailty without pausing to imagine the claustrophobic pressure of those final winter months. Decisions are made in hurried councils, prayers offered in private chapels, and yet the outcome seems written in frost on the palace windows. Small acts, a servant misplacing a message, a minor official leaking news, a courtesan overhearing a plan, nudge the dynasty further toward disaster, a reminder that history pivots as much on whispers as on grand battles. By twilight, the city glows with the amber of lanterns reflecting on snow and ice, a fragile beauty masking the tension underneath. You trudge across the icy courtyard, imagining the last Romanovs packing, children playing unaware, the Tsar struggling to reconcile duty with fear. You probably won't survive without a shiver at the mixture of fragility and inevitability surrounding these human stories. The dynasty, once absolute, now teeters on memory's edge, leaving behind palaces, portraits, and faint traces of opulence interwoven with tragedy. And as you step away from the winter palace into the crisp evening air, you feel the quiet, chilling lesson. Even the most powerful dynasties, insulated by wealth, ritual, and heritage, can fall under the subtle convergence of politics, misfortune, and human frailty. You trudge along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, the Mesopotamian sun dipping toward the horizon, painting the Sassanid city of Ctesiphon in gold and shadow. The empire that once stretched from the Iranian plateau to the edges of the Levant shivers under the weight of external invasions and internal strife. You probably won't survive the heat, the dust, and the relentless stories of collapse without feeling a little dizzy, but the city's cracked walls and toppled columns are themselves eloquent witnesses to history. The air smells faintly of baked clay, spices, and the lingering smoke from ovens abandoned in haste. Somewhere, a river fish flaps feebly, reminding you that life persists even when kingdoms crumble. Inside the grand audience halls, intricate stucco arches cradle the remnants of Persian grandeur. You glide past mosaic floors, imagining nobles clad in rich silks, advisors murmuring into the ears of kings, and scribes recording history that already seems on the brink of obsolescence. The Sassanid court is a complex web of intrigue, familial tension, and religious influence. Zoroastrian priests, once the backbone of royal legitimacy, now whisper of omens, rituals, and cosmic disfavor. Faith that once bound subjects to the king begins to fray. Even the most pious counselors feel the subtle pressure of shifting beliefs and foreign influences. Historians still argue whether the Sassanids fell primarily to Arab military conquests, internal decay, or the devastating combination of both. As you trudge along, it feels like all of these factors are conspiring simultaneously, like a symphony composed to herald an empire's demise. Beyond the palace walls, the streets of Ctesiphon pulse with quiet panic and simmering discontent. Markets that once overflowed with dates, spices, and silks now host nervous merchants, wary soldiers, and refugees carrying what little they can salvage. You notice the subtle signs of systemic collapse: tax collectors demanding impossible sums, irrigation canals silting over, the murmurs of rebellion rising from villages previously bound in loyalty. Even in its final days, the empire's infrastructure, the very veins that fed the heart of Persia, struggles to maintain function. Fringe accounts suggest that some local governors secretly hoarded grain, anticipating either betrayal or imminent conquest, while spies relayed every morsel of news to whoever seemed most likely to prevail. You probably won't survive imagining the sheer tension and fragility without a long pause to absorb it. As you climb toward the palace citadel, the view of the surrounding plains reveals the broader picture. Armies in scattered camps, desert wines sweeping through abandoned fortifications, and the slow, relentless advance of Arab forces, steel and determination carving paths through centuries of Sassanid dominance. You pass through the harem, where concubines whisper warnings, priests chant secret rites, and minor officials carry messages intended to sway the outcome of battles yet to be fought. Even the emperor, the last Sassanid ruler, seems smaller here, dwarfed not just by the walls and columns, but by the weight of history pressing on every decision. Oddly, he maintains a habit of consulting an aged astrologer who predicts events with a mix of superstition and observation, a quirky relic of human hope, perhaps, in the face of inevitability. Disease courses silently through the city, a hidden hand accelerating what might have otherwise been a slower decline. Epidemics of plague and dysentery weaken soldiers and citizens alike, creating fissures in loyalty and sowing fear. Historians still argue whether disease was decisive, but walking through the narrow, winding streets, the toll is evident. Bodies carried discreetly, families displaced, and the hum of normal commerce replaced with murmurs of dread. You probably won't survive without noticing the subtle interplay of human suffering, environmental stress, and political vulnerability, each factor nudging the empire closer to its final act. The Sassanid military, once feared from the Caucasus to the Persian Gulf, now struggles under fractured command. Generals argue over strategy, deserters slip through the ranks, and morale dwindles as supply lines fail. Siege engines are abandoned in the dust, and horses graze on lands that once thrummed with martial discipline. The interplay of ambition, desperation, and fear creates a fragile equilibrium. A single misstep could topple everything. You trudge past training grounds littered with broken weapons and rotting banners, imagining young recruits trembling with loyalty, yet aware of the fragility surrounding them. In quieter corners of the city, religion and superstition interweave with political reality. Zoroastrian temples glow faintly as priests perform rituals meant to avert disaster. Fire kept burning in small hearths while omens are interpreted with tense hands. Fringe theories suggest that some ceremonies involve secret sacrifices or cryptic incantations designed to sway divine favor, but their true efficacy is lost to time. You probably won't survive the thought of faith intertwined with political collapse without marveling at human ingenuity and desperation alike. Every chant, prayer, and ritual is a thread in the tapestry of an empire teetering on the edge, a testament to the subtle nudges that can either delay or accelerate ruin. You wander along the riverbanks at dusk, imagining the last council of ministers, advisors, and generals convening to plan strategy against an unstoppable tide. Each recommendation is a gamble, every choice weighted with both political and human consequences. You notice the small details that often decide history: a misdelivered message, a misinterpreted omen, a whisper of betrayal between allies. Even the simplest acts, the distribution of food, the timing of a march, the choice of a defensive position, become monumental. You probably won't survive without appreciating the intricate fragility of empire in these moments, the way minor nudges ripple outward to shape destinies. Night falls, and the city is quiet, illuminated only by torches flickering against the cold walls. You hear faint echoes of footfalls along deserted streets, perhaps the last couriers delivering news that will never be read, perhaps rebels plotting their next move. In the palaces, the emperor consults his astrologer one last time, fingers tracing the stars in patterns only he understands. You glance at the ancient bridges, the cracked aqueducts, and the still waters reflecting the moonlight, and feel the cumulative weight of centuries pressing toward conclusion. The Sassanid Empire's story is written in whispers, shadowed decisions, and cascading failures that converge like a slow, inevitable tide. Finally, as you step beyond the city walls into the open plains, the night is calm but heavy. The distant hills seem to hold the memory of battles, betrayals, and faded glory. You probably won't survive without pausing to reflect on the delicate balance of human ambition and external forces, the way empires crumble not just through conquest, but through a combination of mismanagement, environmental strain, disease, and small, persistent nudges. See, Ctesiphon sleeps under the stars, a silent witness to the end of a dynasty that once rivaled the mightiest powers of the world. And as you breathe the cool night air, the lesson seeps in softly. Even empires built of steel, stone, and devotion are fragile, their fate forever intertwined with human choice and the subtle currents of circumstance. You trudge along the banks of the Nile once more, this time amid the shadows of a collapsing Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt. The city of Cairo, normally vibrant with markets, minarets, and the chatter of scholars, hums with tension, as if the very air knows that an era is ending. You probably won't survive the heat, dust, and the weight of history pressing in without feeling the ache of centuries settling into your bones. But every scent of spice, every creak of timber in the narrow alleys, draws you closer into the intimate machinery of a dynasty unraveling. Here, the currents of internal betrayal, religious influence, and foreign encroachment swirl like the Nile itself, powerful and unpredictable. Inside the Sultan's palace, corridors echo with cautious footsteps. Courtiers in flowing robes whisper in hushed tones, carrying both advice and gossip, while Mamluk soldiers, once disciplined, now weary, patrol with suspicion rather than authority. The Sultan moves with measured dignity, acutely aware that power is fragile and fleeting. Fringe stories speak of secret factions within the palace, eunuchs and officers plotting coups, religious scholars interpreting celestial signs to influence decisions, and spies from rival factions poised to tip the scales at any moment. Historians still argue whether the Mamluks fell primarily to the Ottoman invasion, or if internal decay had already sealed their fate. But walking these echoing halls, the signs of cumulative failure are impossible to ignore. You trudge past chambers where lavish banquets once dazzled with exotic foods and perfumes. Now, tables lie partially cleared, servants whispering warnings about shortages and rising unrest. Oddly, some Mamluk officers maintain eccentric superstitions, amulets to ward off death, rituals to influence fortune in battle, and talismans tucked into saddlebags for campaigns. You probably won't survive imagining the weight of superstition pressing on military and political decision-making. Yet these small quirks serve as delicate reminders that human psychology, even in times of immense pressure, shapes the fate of dynasties as much as armies and taxes do. Outside, Cairo's streets are alive with rumor and unrest. Markets thrum with wary vendors, soldiers march in uneasy formations, and the scent of bread baking mingles with the faint tang of fear. Even the smallest gestures, a merchant refusing to pay taxes, a scribe misfiling documents, a soldier hesitating to obey an order, become forces nudging the empire toward collapse. The Nile itself mirrors the tension, currents swollen with seasonal rain, carrying both life and latent threat, a fitting metaphor for the dynasty's precarious position. You probably won't survive without noticing how every detail, minor and major, interacts to shape history, the subtle causes cascading into consequences too vast to grasp fully. As night falls, you climb the city's ancient walls, observing distant fires lit to signal military movements, rival factions, and rebellious provinces. Courtiers in hidden alcoves whisper coded messages, and spies scurry under moonlight carrying intelligence that could seal the Sultanate's fate in minutes. The Mamluks, once feared cavalry, now struggles with shortages of food, horses, and cohesion. Internal divisions, the eroding legitimacy of rulers, and religious pressure compound to create a slow-motion catastrophe, a collapse not sudden, but inevitable when viewed from the perspective of these stone walls. Fringe accounts tell of hidden treasures spirited away, sacred relics carried in secret, and clandestine alliances formed with Ottoman agents. Each small action, a nudge pushing the dynasty toward finality. You walk past mosques and madrasas, their domes reflecting the moonlight, imagining the last scholars and theologians debating the empire's future. Faith, which once bolstered loyalty and order, now fractures the population, as differing sects and interpretations fuel dissent, challenge authority, and erode cohesion. You probably won't survive the subtlety of influence without feeling the power of belief as a double-edged sword, guiding rulers in some instances, undermining them in others. The Sultan relies on omens, the advice of learned men, and the counsel of generals, yet each choice seems to nudge history closer to its unavoidable conclusion. In the open plazas, citizens gather in small pockets, murmuring of grievances, famine, and political corruption. Peasant revolts, minor rebellions, and opportunistic marauders exploit weaknesses that the Sultanate cannot contain. Even seemingly trivial occurrences, a mismanaged grain shipment, a delayed decree, a minor quarrel between officers, ripple outward with consequences too vast for any individual to predict. You probably won't survive imagining the delicate balance between chaos and order without appreciating the invisible threads holding, and then unraveling, the empire. Every whisper, glance, and hesitation is a weight pressing on the structure of power. As dawn approaches, the Nile glows with soft light, reflecting the minarets and ruined fortifications alike. You trudge along the riverbanks, imagining the final days. Soldiers deserting, courtiers scheming, religious scholars predicting doom, and the Sultan moving cautiously between councils, aware yet powerless. Small human moments punctuate this grand decline. A mother sneaking bread to a child, a soldier writing a letter home, a scholar hiding a forbidden book. These seemingly minor acts are part of the invisible scaffolding that shapes the fate of empires. Reminders that history is not only battles and decrees, but the accumulation of countless choices, large and small. By mid-morning, the Ottomans advance, banners catching sunlight, troops moving with disciplined efficiency, while the Mamluk forces crumble under miscommunication and fractured leadership. The Sultanate's fall is imminent, yet not sudden. It is the culmination of decades of internal strife, mismanagement, and the slow erosion of legitimacy. You probably won't survive witnessing the convergence of fate, human frailty, and strategic inevitability without pausing in awe. The palaces, fortresses, and mosques stand as silent witnesses, echoing centuries of culture, faith, and human ambition. Finally, as you step from the riverbanks into the empty streets, the weight of the dynasty's final hours settles over you. The city exhales its history, carrying whispers of intrigue, faith, and betrayal. You probably won't survive the emotional resonance of watching centuries of human endeavor dissolve without taking a moment to reflect on the lesson. No matter the splendor, power, or divine claim, dynasties are fragile constructs, vulnerable to the cumulative weight of ambition, mismanagement, faith, and subtle human nudges. And as you turn your gaze from the horizon, where the first rays of sun glint off the Nile, you carry the quiet understanding that even in collapse, there is a strange beauty, a reminder that history, in all its intricacy, never truly ends. You slow your pace, finally leaving the weight of dynasties, empires, and the restless whispers of history behind. The streets, the rivers, the temples, the palaces, they all settle into quiet shadows, as if taking a deep breath after centuries of human ambition and miscalculation. You probably won't survive without feeling the subtle pull of reflection, the soft echo of choices, of loyalties broken and preserved, of faith guiding rulers even as it nudges them toward unforeseen ends. The world stretches before you in gentle undulations, from the jungles of Angkor to the frozen streets of St. Petersburg, the Nile, and the great plains of Persia, each landscape carrying the residue of lives lived, mistakes made, and legacies left behind. You notice the small, human moments tucked among the grand collapses, the mother offering a loaf of bread, the jester delivering truths in jest, the scholar preserving a forbidden book, the astrologer tracing stars in hope. These quiet, enduring fragments are the subtle music beneath the thunder of empires, The notes that remind you human stories persist long after crowns, banners, and walls have crumbled. Fringe tailies and scholarly debates alike fade into soft background hums, as you realize that history is not only battles, taxes, and treaties. It is also curiosity, error, courage, fear, and the endless push and pull of people trying to navigate worlds bigger than themselves. The sun dips low, painting the skies in shades of amber and violet, and you feel your shoulders relax. The lessons linger gently. Ambition is powerful, faith is guiding, loyalty is fleeting, and even the mightiest can falter under the subtle convergence of forces beyond any one person's control. The world exhales, carrying the distant echoes of dynasties that rose, wavered, and fell, leaving only stories, ruins, and the quiet wisdom of impermanence. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the gentle weight of history ease you toward rest. Dream of sprawling empires, whispering courtiers and rivers reflecting the fading glory of the past, knowing that these stories, like the world itself, move quietly, inexorably, and beautifully onward. Sweet dreams.